Hi, John.
Hey, Bob. How are you?
I'm good, but that's the last time I'm going to call you John today. The first startling revelation I have for our viewers is that you used to go by the nickname Chip, and because my wife has known you like forever, I met you back when people called you Chip, and I still call you Chip.
Well, my father's name was also John, so when I was a kid, I was always called Chip for, I guess, Chip off the old block.
That's what I wondered.
Yeah. I also had one of my front teeth was chipped when I was really young, so maybe that was part of it. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, Chip is fine. It would be a little weird if you called me John, because when we see each other off camera, you call me Chip.
That's true.
Chip's fine. I'm not ashamed.
Okay,
Actually, the reason that I've gone with John recently is that Susie, my wife, always hated Chip.
Mm-hmm. Not the person. We should take pains to point out not the person Chip, the name Chip.
Right.
She doesn't always hate you. She only intermittently hates you.
Yes. You know marriage all too well.
Well, and I understand the unique dynamic between you and Susie, but we won't go into that.
Yeah, maybe some other time. All right, so Bob, this is how I thought things could work today. From the comments just on the chats that George and I do, I have sensed this great hunger on the part of the Blogging Heads audience to know more about you. Where you come from, what you're really like. You're sort of a mysterious figure to these people. So I thought today we could walk through not only your career but your life and get a sense of how your views of the world have evolved over time and where they came from originally. So actually, my title for this chat would be The Evolution of Bob.
That's a good book title. Somebody should write that book if they could finish the damn thing. Well, this is not actually the mission I initially signed up for. I mean, when I heard that George couldn't make it, I stepped in valiantly to keep the Science Saturday tradition alive and said I would do it. On the other hand, I have to admit that it does appeal to my vanity. I don't know if you had this, but when you're like a young person and hoping to be a writer, Did you ever have these fantasies about being on what then it would have been the Dick Cavett show? Remember the Dick Cavett show?
Oh, yeah.
He would interview these writers. Did you ever think, someday that could be me?
Not really.
Oh, okay. Well, then I just embarrassed myself by admitting that I kind of thought someday that could be me. And then in the real world, okay, now the closest thing is like the Charlie Rose show. And now, in the real world, unless you're like a super famous writer, you write a book and you're lucky if you get on the Charlie Rose show. But even then, it's like you're not one of these what makes you tick guests. You're one of these, you've got 9 minutes to make your book pitch and then get off because Harold Pinter's going to come on and I'm going to ask him what makes him tick. So if we could, pretend you're Charlie Rose, that would be deeply gratifying. On the other hand, I actually have some questions I'd like to ask you. So maybe...
Okay, well, some of those might arise as we walk through your major views of life and existence and God and all that stuff.
Well, okay, because if at any point... If it seems like we've gone too long without talking about actual science, which after all is what Science Saturday is nominally about, that will be the point for me to interject my interrogation of you regarding your book, The End of Science, because I have that. I definitely have a question I want to raise about that. So
that would be fine.
So proceed, and then we'll see when I can put the ball in your court.
Okay, first I want to ask you, and I realize thinking about some of these questions that I really have only a vague sense of your upbringing. But you were, as I recall, raised in the South in a Christian family. Is that right?
I was raised in a Christian family. I was, as Steve Martin says in the movie The Jerk, I was born a poor black child. No, I was not actually even raised in the South. Both of my parents were from rural farm families. I I say with some reverse snob pride that my father's father was an actual sharecropper, like Clarence Thomas's grandfather. Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. No, my father grew up very, very, very poor. Like half of his siblings died, and both of his parents.
Was he college educated?
No, he dropped out of high school. But by the time he was like 15, like half of his siblings and both of his parents had died. And he took me once to. This is ridiculously self-indulgent. I'm sorry. We do have these topic things.
This is
they can
interesting.
skip ahead to the science, but I would like to briefly praise my father. He once took me to the place they had lived. This is like Depression-era America, and it was not even... I mean, there was basically nothing left of it, but it was not really a house. It was what was called a dugout. You would dig, 3 feet down, and then you would put some wood up for walls, and then the floor would be the dirt, or whatever. Maybe they put wood over it, but 3 feet down. And they were really, really, it was like he doesn't know why his various relatives died, because they didn't have the kind of medical treatment that would ever get clear on that.
So very third world.
Well, just Dust Bowl America. I mean, it was, I don't know.
And what state was this?
What state?
Yeah.
It was, and I don't even know if Dust Bowl, I don't know how it corresponds to the drought, but Depression-era America in West Texas, where it's almost impossible to get a crop to grow in the best of circumstances, Mm-hmm. So anyway, he dropped out of high school, went to work on the railroad with his surviving brother. Then FDR saved him, actually. He learned surveying in one of these, civilian, CCC, one of these FDR New Deal programs, and that made him qualify for the artillery in the Army, and then he fought in World War II, and then he retired as a colonel in the early 70s.
And he was, now I know he was a Baptist. Was he actually a minister, or did he have some role?
No, I've heard that rumor, actually. That
I
he
don't know
was.
where...
You probably are the one who spread it, but
I may have.
Yeah, I've heard that rumor. But no, my mother was more devoutly religious, actually, but neither one of them was clergy. They were both Southern Baptist.
And was that an important part of your life? I mean, was religion a real presence in your house?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, first of all, if you go to a Southern Baptist church, you won't forget it. A real, it's an intense, they imbue you with the sense that, God is always watching. If you don't take the right path, you'll go to hell. And I actually responded to the call to the altar when I was like 9 or something, spontaneously. My parents weren't there because it was some kind of revival thing. And, it's not like, Catholics just get baptized at birth. Of course, Baptists think you should choose to be baptized. Mm-hmm. And I remember there was this there was this evangelist. It was a revival. For 2 weeks each summer there would be a revival. This is at a Baptist church in El Paso, Texas. And
so this is a born again kind of tradition, right?
Well, yeah, that is the idea. You didn't really hear that phrase, especially. I think partly because I don't know why, but but yeah, strictly speaking, it's evangelical. I think things have changed a lot in terms of what that means. But yeah.
But I mean, people would actually have religious experiences in church.
Well, no, there wasn't speaking in tongues. They weren't Pentecostals. I mean, at the end of every service, they would play this beautiful song called "Just As I Am." And as the minister would issue what was called the invitation. Mm-hmm. And that was for people who had not yet been saved, who had not yet been baptized, to make the decision to accept Christ as their Savior and come up and agree to be baptized. And they would be baptized at a later service. When I did this, it was like at it was during a revival, and it was some kind of nighttime service. My parents were there. And they had kind of, I think this is the time when they had sequestered, a bunch of us kids. And I remember this one appeal that was I remember I think this is shortly before I decided to be mad, before I responded to the call, but I remember one I guess, minister. It would be like a guest minister who did the revival, but talking to the kid, just the kid, saying, you know, listen to your heartbeat, listen to your heartbeat, you know, thump, 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 thump. Then imagine, it stops. Where are you going to go?
Jesus.
Yeah. Got my attention. I'm like, well, I guess if I had my choice, heaven.
Man, that's pretty effective proselytizing there. Well,
it's a very refined technology.
Okay, so I want to get to how you fell away from this sort of intense belief. When did that start happening?
Actually, it was the theory of natural selection. And my parents even, because you see, they were basically creationists. I think by the time my mother died, I had kind of convinced her that I think she was much more open-minded about that and thinking about reconciling evolution with a belief in God. But they actually, in my teen years, when we were living in San Antonio, got a Baptist minister who was a friend of theirs to come over and try to talk me out of believing in the theory of natural selection.
Huh.
He did not entirely succeed.
You'd been exposed to it just in school, in biology classes?
Yeah, sophomore biology. It was a very compelling theory. You know, it's just so beautiful and how powerful it is.
Well, so how was it that... So your father didn't go to college. Did your mother go to college?
No.
In other words, I'm trying to understand how you became such an intellectual. When, you know, was there some particular influence when you were a teenager that set you on this path of becoming a professional thinker?
I don't know. I should say my father did finally, I think when he was a major or lieutenant colonel, finish up a college degree. It was too late to be a big boost in his career, kind of, but he did. And then my mother, after my father died, went back and got an associate's degree at junior college, much to her credit. I actually, I think actually... I have a brother-in-law named Rick Ayler who may have been influential when I was a teenager. Well, anyway, he was in the he was at that time, I think, maybe a graduate student in philosophy or something. It was very interesting. I remember he introduced me to B.F. Skinner. I read Beyond Freedom and Dignity kind of just on my own as a teenager, and that was a very compelling book to me. And in a certain sense, still is. I mean, the points he made about the determinism free will question. You know, I had never really thought about that, and I don't. Skinner is thought of as this behaviorist who emphasized the complete malleability of people, which he kind of did, but he's thought of as, for that reason, just wholly incompatible with some kind of Darwinian evolutionary psychology view of human nature. And I don't quite totally see it that way, because I think positive and negative reinforcement are very powerful shapers of human behavior. It's just that our genetic heritage, first of all, defines what we will consider positive and negative reinforcement. It's like we like the approval of other people, for example. That's positive reinforcement. And in other ways, it kind of channels, where we're going to seek the positive and negative reinforcement and so on. So a lot of the program is structured, but people are very malleable.
Right. Well, this just shows that no paradigm of human behavior or the mind ever really is completely discredited. They just go in and out of fashion. In fact, I got a book recently from a professor at Duke, trying to rehabilitate the reputation of behaviorism. But anyway, okay, so you were exposed to Darwin, and then how was it that you ended up at Princeton? So that was the next sort of stage in your evolution.
Well, as an undergraduate, you mean? Yeah. I actually spent my freshman year at Texas Christian University. Not that I was at that point any kind of Christian, but my parents had kind of limited horizons in terms of higher education. And the thought was, the point of doing well in high school is to get a scholarship to college, and then it'll be, cheaper. And the place you could get, places you could get like a full tuition scholarship or something, were not, were not places like Princeton. And besides, my parents didn't want me to leave the state anyway. So I went to TCU.
Jeez, I never knew that.
You didn't?
That's interesting. I can't imagine you at a school like that.
I had the same problem even after I was there. The horned frogs, the TCU horned frogs. That was one problem I had with the place. I just, just rooting for horned frogs on the football field. I'm sorry.
Well, the mascot of the school where I teach now, Stevens, is the duck. So I'm not sure if that's any better.
Well, Oregon is the Ducks, right? And they're a powerhouse sometimes.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So you got out of there, though.
I had this English teacher named Virginia Peake in San Antonio who had said when she heard that I was going to TCU, she was totally just, shocked. And it was kind of too late to change. And she said, like, I thought you were kind of kidding about, like, that kind of stuff. Like, and she put in my mind the idea that, she said, we once had a graduate of this high school, we go to Princeton or something, And so then, when TCU didn't seem entirely perfect for me, I sent off for application materials at various selected universities, and Princeton seemed like one of the easier ones to fill out or something.
By this time, did you know that you wanted to be a writer, or what? What were your aspirations?
Yeah, actually, yeah. This is so self-indulgent. Is this Science Saturday or what?
No, this is good. No, this is, whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
It's to satisfy the hunger of the audience.
Yeah, I know. There's a vast pin-up demand. I mean, we probably should rent an extra server to stream the bandwidth.
They want to be closer to you, Bob.
Yeah.
No, this is great. Okay, so what did you want to be at this point? Did you know you wanted to be a writer?
My mother had put in my mind the thought that I might be a journalist. And it was, remember Woodward and Bernstein and Watergate, journalism was really sexy. I mean, and the same English teacher had suggested that I read All the President's Men.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So it started with political journalism instead of science journalism.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, huh.
In fact, I exhausted my science requirements at college by taking psychology courses. I didn't take any real, I mean, with all due respect for psychology, didn't take any real science in college.
No, but
you may agree. I think that's kind of an asset, almost. I mean, as you know, the people who have the hardest time communicating to a lay audience about science are the people who know the most, in a sense. That is, the scientists.
Yeah, you go native.
Yeah, the more immersed you are in a subject, the harder it is to remember what it is that the average person does not know about that subject.
Well, I actually I was an English major, but I took a lot of science courses. But they were, by the time I actually started writing about science, first of all, I'd forgotten a lot of what I studied in college, and second, most of it wasn't relevant to the sorts of science that I was covering as a journalist. So it didn't matter that much, but I think you're right that it can be an asset to come from a position of ignorance because you relate to your audience better.
Yeah. Certainly there are not many scientists that are good at communicating their work, although it's also true that I think some of the best scientists are pretty damn good writers, I mean, Einstein, right? Richard Feynman.
Yes. Actually, I wanted to, later we could talk about what it means when a science is really dependent on argument and rhetorical skill as opposed to pure data. But anyway, so you're you're at Princeton finally, and this was what, mid-70s, late 70s?
Yeah, and we're 20 minutes into this, and I'm only to Princeton, so we may want to kind of do a little fast-forwarding here if we're going to...
Okay, right. So I just wanted to bring up John McPhee. You had a creative writing class with him. And
it wasn't creative, no. It was not. It was called The Literature of Fact. It was nonfiction.
Okay.
I mean, creative, yes, but not in the sense of fiction.
So he's turned out some really important writers. Richard Preston also was a student of his.
Yes, he and David Remnick.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Very impressive.
Um,
So what did you want to be when you got out of that class? Did you want to be like John McPhee, a sort of literary writer?
I mean, first of all, he gave me the confidence to, like, not go to law school or something.
Mm-hmm.
He said he thought I could actually be a writer. And if that hadn't happened, I might have gone to law school.
Yeah.
And would have saved a lot of money for Blogging Heads, for one thing, because I would work for cheaper than $400 an hour. But it's funny, my first book is more McPhee-esque than my subsequent books.
Right.
Three Scientists is more narrative. And I'm not naturally the kind of writer he naturally is.
I disagree. I heard you when you and George were talking, and you were going on and on about, what a great storyteller I am, and how you can't tell stories, you don't have the storytelling gene. That was real bullshit, Bob. I mean, I actually was going back and flipping through Three Scientists, and you tell wonderful stories in there, and you're great at character-driven narrative and describing these complicated scenes that take place between you and your sources. Anyway, maybe we should skip.
Nice of you to say that, but I would just to clarify, it takes me a lot more time and work to tell a story in an engaging way than it takes you. You just naturally do it. You talk that way. I'm just not a natural storyteller. But anyway.
Okay. Anyway, well, maybe we should cut forward to Three Scientists, so we start getting into some of the ideas that have obsessed you. I was just
wait. Maybe now's the time to interject my question about the end of science.
Okay. Sure.
Here's my question. I think I have my critique of the end of science. Your book, The End of Science, made a big splash. It was not welcome in all circles. Notably, the interest group known as scientists did not warm up to the title, The End of Science. Who would have guessed? So you took a lot of flack from them. My view is, I think there's a version of your argument that I would insist is at least arguably defensible, is plausible, but I'm not sure it's exactly the way you put the argument.
Okay.
And so here's my question to you. I'm sure people come up to you and all the time and say, how can you say science has ended? We now know this about this gene, blah, blah, blah. And, of course, one thing you do is I think rightly sometimes minimize the actual amount of confidence we have in various scientific findings, and in fact you got a big vindication from this Gary Taubes thing, because you've been saying that forever, right? I mean
about epidemiology
about how many of these things are, like, for all we know, due to the placebo effect, and just minimizing the supposedly breathtaking findings in pharmacology, and you wanted to cast doubt on the extent of our confidence in these kinds of findings, I think, broadly, right?
Sure,
I mean,
that's a big part of it, but also even when you have something that's totally legitimate, like Dolly the Sheep, that came out, I think, a year or two after The End of Science was published, and that's a legitimate, really important advance.
The cloning
first
cloning of a mammal, yeah.
Right, but it's an application of a pre-existing paradigm of DNA-based genetics. So my argument in The End of Science wasn't that we won't have significant findings in the future. It's just that we won't have any on the order of the theory of evolution by natural selection, the double helix, the Big Bang, quantum mechanics, relativity. So we have these giant paradigms, these huge insights into nature. Those are in place. In the future, we're going to be refining and extending and applying those insights, but we won't have great revelations in the future analogous to those. That was really what I was saying.
Okay.
And that really hasn't been on that point, that subtlety, and it's really not even that subtle, hasn't really been fully appreciated by some of my critics. And actually, evolutionary psychology is a perfect example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. So you've got a 150-year-old paradigm that's being touted as the new and improved way to understand human nature. So it's exactly the kind of thing that you would expect if you look at science in the way that I look at it.
Let me back into that argument, actually, because I half agree with you, even though I'm obviously a big booster of evolutionary psychology. But let me back into that question by telling you the way I would have, the form of your thesis that I think may be valid is if you say, for philosophical purposes, science has ended. In other words, there have been big advances in science that were really philosophically reorienting, right? When we discovered that, say, the sun does not revolve around the Earth, even, I mean, there have been various things. I mean, if you look at what are some, in the realm of metaphysics, moral philosophy, I think you could make the argument that if you look at the frontiers of science where light has been shed on these big metaphysical, moral philosophy type questions, you would be, it may well be the case, if you look closely, that we're not going to get a lot of new information, okay? So, for example, in quantum physics, it's like, now quantum physics was itself a very philosophically important development because it unsettled the Newtonian determinism, right?
Right.
And so, whereas some scientists would have thought, oh, well, determinism, free will, it's all kind of settled, it's all machinery. Quantum physics certainly throws into that into doubt. It doesn't have the answer to the predicament, but it throws it into doubt. Now, it throws into doubt any confidence, really, in a certain sense, but certainly any kind of positive assertion that determinism is the reigning paradigm. At the same time, quantum physics, kind of gives you the vibe that, look, we are up against, quantum physics puts us up against kind of the wall in terms of what we can make sense of. Because in this realm, right?
I think the big exception, I guess the problem that I have with how you're posing this is that it suggests that we've reached a point where we sort of know where we stand on some big philosophical issues. Maybe that's not what you meant, but I would...
No, not that we have the answers or know where we should stand.
We just know that we're facing certain mysteries, and we probably always will. Let me just give you one possible exception to that, and this is an area where my thinking really has changed over the last 10 years, and that's in neuroscience and what it can say about free will. I think free will might just be one of these, there's certain problems related to the mind that really seem to be in a special category. It seems like they're not the sorts of things that we can answer scientifically, but I think it's possible that we might have a better understanding of free will in the future if we understand the brain's software better. I mean, you might have heard me talk on some of these chats with George Johnson about the neural code. I think that's one area where we might have an insight into how our minds work and how our minds affect our behavior and so forth. Neuroscience might really give us some insight as big as natural selection or DNA-based, as any of these other big paradigms I've been talking about. It might not. I mean, the question is still unresolved. But I think that's one area, that's the single most likely realm of science to give us something really earth-shattering.
Well, I certainly think we'll learn a lot in that realm. The question of whether that will give us a lot of new insight into either the free will question or the mind-body question is, to me, an open one. And I think it may turn out that we're just not going to get any new data about those. Now, I could be wrong. I mean, it's certainly relevant, for example, to figure out whether quantum effects are influential in the brain.
Right. I think that's going to be a dead end. I just think it's you've got to find the right level of reality for solving certain questions, and I just think that the quantum level is too deep. It's like trying to explain human behavior in terms of particle physics. Particle physics is just not relevant. I don't think quantum effects will be either.
Well, you may be right. I certainly would not be. That's my point. I would not be surprised if, in terms of pondering free will, mind-body, two of the biggest questions, we just never get any more new data. And even though we gain a vastly deeper understanding of how the mind actually works, I think it's quite possible we won't learn more. Now, moving to the realm of moral philosophy, and this is where I back into evolutionary psychology, I would say with moral philosophy, I think it's not quite the same. I mean, in other words, I don't think... well, let me start over. The deal is, I really think with moral philosophy, it's pretty clear that we know everything we're going to know. With the one loophole that, I guess if we gain new insight into free will, that will influence moral philosophy. But my basic feeling about moral philosophy is most moral philosophers have still not absorbed the implications of the Darwinian paradigm. And to some extent, I agree with you that if they had wanted to, they could have started absorbing them 150 years ago.
Right.
The Darwin
certainly
himself,
with Nietzsche. Certainly with Nietzsche.
Well, yeah, but once Darwin convinced us that human beings probably evolved by natural selection, Darwin himself said, look, if we had been, if our society happened to have the social structure of honeybees or something like this, he chose an insect, we would think that it is our sacred duty to kill our sibling, or something like that, okay? His point was, once you understand that your moral intuitions ultimately have a foundation in your biology, and the biology was constructed by a process of natural selection that does not seem to deserve our moral reverence, right? Mm-hmm. It casts doubt on all of your moral intuitions. You have to rethink everything from the ground up. And you can never again say, I think retribution is good because it feels right. Because I get this sense when I see that somebody who did wrong is punished, or, I get this sense, it feels like I'm in touch with some sort of natural law. That's not enough. That's like an instinct. Now, I want to stress, sometimes we have to punish people, but it's not. I think I made the argument in The Moral Animal. One thing that it seems to me is now the case is retribution is not a moral good in and of itself, and most people feel it is.
I'd like to. I think this will be related, but I'd like to sort of shift over to a point that you made at the end of Three Scientists and Their God. So if you remember... Okay, let me just interject one thing. The defense I'd make of evolutionary psychology, as far as your point that, hey, we've known this for 150 years, the retribution is an example of a specific case where evolutionary psychology has gotten us much clearer on the evolutionary dynamics that led to the sense that retribution is good. So evolutionary psychology has filled in a lot of the details in a compelling way that to me makes it much harder to ignore the philosophical implications, even though for most people that's not enough, and they're only noticing the whole problem now that people are doing brain scans and showing that moral decision making is biological in this very vivid way. So that's my last thing on that. All right. Let's see. All right. Okay, rather than attacking, or not attacking, but pointing out the problems I have with evolutionary psychology, I'd like to go to what might be an even bigger issue. If you remember, when I read you gave me the manuscript of Three Scientists and Their Gods, and I guess a year or so before it was published, and I loved the book. I loved it. I loved the writing. I
remember that. Don't worry.
The ideas were really powerful and provocative. The one nit that I picked, if you recall, was
that part I don't recall.
Okay, was at the very. You might remember it when I bring it up. Sid Vicious. So remember at the very end, you're saying. So we've looked at all these grand ways of looking at existence. Ed Fredkin looking at the universe as a giant computer. Ed Wilson seeing it through the lens of natural selection. And Kenneth Boulding, who is seeing evolution and life heading towards some great unifying synthesis in which we're all bound by love and so forth. And at the very end of the book, you say, so is it possible for us to come up with a set of values that are consistent with some of these scientific ways of looking at the world, and then the way that you always do, you added all the caveats, the dangers of this sort of enterprise of inferring oughts from ises, but then you said, well, one thing we can do is reject a life like that of Sid Vicious, who was just devoted to...
We should remind. I guess both our younger and older viewers that Sid Vicious was in the group the Sex Pistols, and did he finally commit suicide or what?
I forget I think his girlfriend might have shot him to death. It was sort of I think it was a murder-suicide. They were both heroin addicts, so they were really debauched people. There was a great movie about their lives called
Sid and Nancy, yeah.
If anybody wants to get into it. But and I accused you of being kind of, I actually found myself defending Sid Vicious, and I wasn't really even clear on why. I think I accused you of just being too prissy, and I thought that you were presenting him as an example of total nihilism, of somebody who has no values at all beyond self-gratification. And first of all, I think anybody, this is a guy who's a musician, so he is, you can see that as a higher purpose. He's trying to communicate his own way of looking at the world to other people. But the larger problem that I had was that I thought in some sense you were equating scientific truth with meaning. And, I think truth is universal. I'm not a postmodernist. I think science discovers some true things about the world, and those are true for everybody at all times. And what religions are about are an attempt to find a set of values, a meaningful way of living that is also universal. And to me, that's just completely wrong-headed. Every one of us has to find some meaningful way of living a life that's unique to us. For Sid Vicious, it was shooting up heroin and singing completely nihilistic songs. For a Buddhist monk, it could be living in a cave, having absolutely no communication with anybody else, just being on a solitary quest for enlightenment. For some people, it's just making as much money as possible. You have something that's at the end of the book that's pretty unobjectionable in one sense, that the highest meaning is being committed to something larger than yourself. So, the epitome of that would be somebody like Mother Teresa, I suppose, devoting your life to helping others. But that's fine for Mother Teresa, but when you try to transform any of these values into universals, that's when you get into trouble. I think that's the big mistake that religion has made.
Well, first of all, you believe in some universal moral truths, right?
No, I don't.
If the reason Sid Vicious, assuming his girlfriend did shoot him, if the reason that she shot him is that he beat and raped her, you would say the beating and raping was wrong in some moral sense, or not?
Yeah, but that is a completely different category than wrong or right in science.
Oh, of course.
But that's a very important distinction.
Truth. It's moral truth. It's not empirical. It's not a description of the way the world works. It's more related to the way the world should work in some sense that you think has a solid foundation.
Even to say something as basic as life is good or joy is better than suffering, those are opinions. Those aren't in the same category as saying that the Earth revolves around the sun, or all matter is made out of elements or matter or atoms and those sorts of scientific truth statements.
So you think it's just no? Obviously, we're not talking about scientific truth, but I'm asking you about moral truth. Do you think it is a moral truth that walking up to somebody you don't know and beating them and killing them is wrong in some absolute moral sense?
Absolute sense? No. Absolute.
It's just,
I mean, we're
it's
getting
just
into
my opinion that it's wrong.
See, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I've been obsessing over religion for a while now and trying to figure out what makes it go wrong, and it seems to me that people are confusing values with truth. Because even when you say something like you shouldn't walk up to somebody and beat them over the head with a baseball bat, that's a value. It's completely different than making a statement about the world that's a scientific statement. That's either right or wrong.
I'm certainly not contesting that. The big question facing humanity is whether, in light of science, including evolutionary psychology, we can even talk about moral truth. Nobody's arguing that a moral truth is the same as a scientific truth. The question is, can we talk about moral absolutes at all? And I'm trying to get clear on whether you do or don't. And I'm kind of thinking you don't think it's in any absolute sense wrong to walk up and kill somebody. Is that what you're saying?
Actually, a lot of people do equate scientific truth with moral truth.
Okay, but you're not arguing with one of them right now, so that's not the issue.
I think it's wrong because it's wrong because you look at the practical consequences of a world in which we're all completely selfish and violently pursuing our interests at the expense of others.
And what would be wrong with that kind of world? What would be wrong with that kind of world?
It would so all right. Let me try to say.
I don't disagree that it would be wrong. I'm just wondering.
I think when you decide that you want to create a system of values that maximizes your human happiness and flourishing and so forth, you have to start with givens. They can't be, they're not givens in the same sense as gravity or the atomic theory of matter. They're just things that reasonable people can agree upon, like happiness is better than suffering.
Right. I agree.
So you build on those axioms, but those aren't truths. You can't say that those are truths. You can just say that they are assumptions that were led to by common sense and by this sort of agreement that we all have that we'd all like to enjoy life as much as possible, given that sometimes our interests are going to be bumping into the interests of others. Do you see what I'm getting at?
So I think you've kind of highlighted what the problem is. I mean, you do have to begin any moral system with some foundational truth to get anywhere. Right. And if you're not willing to posit something like, to say it makes sense to talk about, say, human happiness as a fundamental moral good, if you can't say that about anything, you can't get anywhere. Now, if you are willing,
even that, you can say. I mean, there's some people, there's some philosophers who would say that the quest for truth and self-knowledge or knowledge of the world are more important than happiness.
Yeah.
That's an ancient philosophical debate in itself. What I'm trying to get at is that we're in the realm of opinion.
Right.
Rather than empirical scientific fact.
We're absolutely not in the realm of empirical scientific truth. And I think, we probably can't go a lot further here. I mean, I think you've isolated the problem. I am personally, you sound like you are at least a consequentialist in the sense that, you evaluate moral questions in terms of what their consequences would be. The first thing you said is what would be wrong with that is if everybody did it, the world would be a terrible place. So it's the consequences of the act you focus on. The most common subset of consequentialist philosophy is utilitarianism. It's not the only kind of consequentialism, but the idea that, you want to maximize human welfare in some sense. And I am vaguely speaking, a utilitarian. And in The Moral Animal, I tried to make a case that utilitarianism or something like it could have a solid foundation even in light of what science has told us, even in light of the doubt cast on our moral intuitions. But I am not 100% satisfied that that's an airtight argument, and you're exactly right on what the big challenge is.
I guess it comes down to what sort of society that you favor, or what sort of religion you would favor. So, I gather in all your writings, really, you're looking for some kind of set of shared values that we can all agree on. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I think it would be better if we can create a society that allows us each to pursue happiness in our own particular way, whether or not it agrees with even the majority view of what a good life should be.
No, but you do want a society in which everyone agrees you shouldn't kill people for no reason, right?
Yes, right.
So you do, John Horgan, Chip Horgan, believe that there is some bedrock value that you actually do want all of humanity to share. Now we're just arguing about the details. We both want some shared values.
Absolutely. I mean, so I've been writing and thinking a lot about how we can achieve a war without militarism and the threat of violence.
What would war without militarism? Like, you want the wars to happen, you just don't want us to wear uniforms or something?
No, I want not only the abolition of war, because you can imagine a world in which everybody is armed to the teeth. Let's say all nations have nuclear weapons, so they all exist in a state of mutual terror, and the peace is maintained in that way. That is not a healthy situation. I'm talking about a world not only peaceful, but demilitarized, or maybe we have some residual police force. So,
and you think that would be good, right?
Yes.
With like a capital G.
I think it would be very good.
Okay.
Whether or not it's achievable. Actually, I just found this essay that you wrote back in '99 in those hopeful halcyon years for the New York Times Magazine about the end of war. I was astonished to see.
I wrote a piece about the end of war.
Yeah, you don't remember this?
What did I say? You sure it was the New York Times Magazine?
This was before the stock market started crashing.
Was it? This wasn't about satellite technology, was it?
No, it was. Look, I'll hold it up.
Is it the magazine or the op-ed page?
It's the magazine. It's called "What Was War?"
Oh, right. That was like full of little pieces. They assigned a bunch of little pieces.
Yeah, but it was great. It was because it was. It's the kind of. It's exactly what I've been obsessing over lately. Obviously, I think that this is a great good, and that everybody, pretty much, except some warmongering freaks like Dick Cheney, would prefer to live in a world not only without war, but even without the threat of war. So it was interesting to me to see that you were thinking about this back in the late '90s. So there are things there are values that I have, and that I would even like to see a lot of other people agree on. I'm sure I haven't made this point clearly enough, but I always wanted to distinguish between those value judgments and scientific truth statements. The mistake that religion makes is in assuming that some of these values are universal and they're even somehow intrinsic to the fabric of the universe and even predate the appearance of humanity. That's just this mistake we made thousands of years ago, and that we would be better off putting behind us once and for all.
Okay, let me stop.
And I see you as part of. I see your great enterprise as trying to come up with a set of value universals that are compatible with science somehow, and would lead to a new sort of enlightened, modern religion. And I understand the impulse, but it kind of scares me a little bit.
Okay, well, I'm sorry about that. Being a utilitarian, I'm sorry I've caused you pain. But the let me brief footnote. My position on war, even in 1999, is really what it is now, which is that in the modern world, war between nation states is a totally manageable problem. It is plausible to think we could put an end to it, but even then I was saying the big problem is terrorism. And our problem is that we've mismanaged that and overreacted to terrorist threats, and that's responsible for at least one war going on now. But anyway, I continue to believe that the concerns about war between nation states in the U.S. and China is vastly overblown, totally manageable problem, unless we let the terrorism thing draw us into some kind of clash of civilizations, which we seem to be doing. But anyway, that's my position on that.
I'd like to get back to that, though, at least to, I wanted to ask you about one-world scenarios and, how actually you could have a more or less disarmed world, whether or not that's even possible, whether we need to preserve sovereignty of nations in some important way.
Well, which way would you like me to go at this point? I mean, the religion thing... if you ask, you're right. What I am interested in, there's a couple of answers to that question. There's, for starters, I'm interested in bringing to people's attention those aspects of a scientific worldview which actually can be conducive to a moral approach to the world. That are not dispiriting. Because I've tried to be fairly honest about the dispiriting parts. I do think science throws us into this philosophical crisis, for example. But at the same time, let's look at evolutionary psychology again. On the one hand, yes, I think rightly understood, it makes us question our moral intuitions. On the other hand, I think it does do a kind of a Buddhist service, if you think about it, getting you to realize that you live your life in an almost illusory state, in the sense that we automatically assign these values to pretty much everything we see. Just even walking down the street, it's hard not to kind of go, that guy looks like an asshole. She looks nice, in one sense or another. But all of these evaluative things that when you think about them, they're really Darwinian survival mechanisms. They do not correspond, and this gets back to your point. You're under the illusion that they correspond to some kind of moral truth. They don't. They are illusions sponsored ultimately by your genes. And I think appreciating that can, in principle, turn you into a better person, although it's actually very hard to harness the knowledge to that end. In other words, just knowing it is not enough. That's why I also think Buddhist monks are right to think that it actually takes a discipline like daily meditation or something to even begin translating the, I think, truth of that perspective into actually, better moral behavior, into being a better person. Knowing it by itself, in my experience, does almost no good. But it does at least, it can at least convince you that there is this challenge. That you are, ordinary waking consciousness is a dream world in a certain sense. And you will actually be closer to something I think you can call moral truth by trying to rid yourself of a lot of that kind of sensory baggage.
Well, since you're touching on religion here again, one thing I was determined to do...
But see, I'm kind of not in the theistic sense, and I think one thing you're doing is a lot of the things you don't like about specific theistic religions, although most of Buddhism actually is very theistic, contrary to common belief. But,
oh, absolutely.
But anyway, if you think kind of about a very American secular Buddhism, it doesn't have a lot of the properties of religion that really drive you nuts, I think.
Well, let me see. I wanted to pin you down on what your religious belief, such as it is, what it's really about. So, I wanted to figure out how your belief or non-belief differs from mine, for example. So, at the end of Nonzero, you have this. It was classic sort of Bob writing. You're hedging like crazy. You're coming right up to the verge of saying that there is divine purpose manifest in the history of life on Earth. but you're not quite there. This is what Simon Conway Morris faulted you for in his review of the book. But so do you or do you not think that there is some kind of, that there was a creator, that there is a plan to human existence and even the history of life in general? And if so, what is it? To what extent can we know it? What are the consequences of that kind of belief?
Well, that's a long.
I know it's a big question to throw at you.
I actually now have a more refined version of the argument. First of all, but to tell you broadly speaking, first of all, when you say I'm kind of hedging, I'm trying to confine myself to things I think you can actually empirically argue for. Okay, it's not. There's not. I haven't had some kind of divine revelation. I did do a 1-week silent meditation retreat at which I had certainly profound spiritual experiences. I think you could safely say, but I don't. Yahweh has not revealed Himself to me. I'm trying. What I believe is the following. I have to couch my terms very carefully. Okay, in some sense, and I want to emphasize, in some sense, I think there is a lot of evidence that there is a higher purpose. In some sense, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's good news. I think you can go further and argue that if we try to discern what the purpose is, there is something upbeat about it. There is something potentially inspiring about it. Maybe it is on balance good, but the main thing I feel pretty confident of is that there is higher purpose in some sense. Now let me, by way of stressing how carefully I'm couching that, give you the following analogy. Okay, Paley, the 18th century theologian,
right.
blind watchmaker. Okay, this is a famous story.
Argument from design.
Right. He says, look at. He first of all says, if you find a pocket watch, it's different from a rock. You can tell it was designed for something. Okay, but he's kind of right. Then he says, now look. I don't know if he says exactly this, but it's the spirit of the argument. He says, look at an animal. Clearly kind of designed to do something, right? Different from a rock. Has goals, It develops kind of, what is it? I don't know what the adverb would be. Ontogeny, or epigenesis. It develops, it unfolds. In keeping with what seems to be a kind of coherent plan toward this mature, complex, integrated organism, it's kind of hard to believe that it's just like a rock with no purpose. Now, in an important sense, he was right. Okay, what he thought he was doing was making a successful argument for divine creation. Okay, God created this animal, and he was wrong about that. But it is true. It is true that to explain that animal, you do need a special category of explanation that isn't the same as for a rock. We now know what the explanation is. Natural selection. Okay. So, and when we talk about natural selection designing things, we put designing in quotes because it's not a conscious process, presumably, and it's not at all what we usually have in mind when we think of designer. But the fact remains, and this is something, by the way, that even Dan Dennett agrees with, that you can talk about organisms as having goals, kind of purposes. They are designed to eat so that they can reproduce. They do have goals that are imbued in them by something. Turns out it's natural selection. Could have been a god creating them directly. It wasn't. It was natural selection. But the point is, you actually can look at an organism, watch it grow to maturity, watch what it does, and correctly infer that there is some sense in which it has purpose or goals that are imbued by a creative process. Okay. My argument is that if you watch all of life unfold on this planet and ask the same question about that, the development of the whole ecosystem, including us, okay, from bacteria. If you ask the same question about that and say, does this have the hallmarks of moving toward something that in some sense has goals? Does it have design in at least this, the hallmarks of design in at least this generic sense of design, where we don't know if it's a God, we don't know if it's a good God, we don't know if it's just a meta-natural selection process, so it just moves the question one level up. We don't know. My argument is that the answer is yes. The answer is yes, there is, on balance, enough evidence so that if you had to guess, yes or no, is there any sense in which there is higher purpose? I contend the correct answer is yes, on balance, in light of the evidence.
First of all, you have, for 3 billion years, roughly, out of the 4 billion years of life on Earth, all you had were single-celled organisms, basically algae and bacteria. So the idea that they're, so if you looked at the history of life at any point in that whole process, it wouldn't look like the emergence of conscious, intelligent, questioning creatures was very inevitable. Second, it's something about our brains. Each of us is at the center of our own universe, and so we're naturally inclined to narcissism and anthropomorphism. So the anthropomorphism is a natural consequence of our theory of mind tendency, sort of imputing emotions and intentions and so forth.
And I may be guilty of that, you're saying.
Well, I just
could be.
So when I look at the universe, the reason I'm an agnostic and not an atheist is so I grew up Catholic. I still wrestle with the problem of evil. I'm still a Catholic in that sense. So the way I deal with religion is in religious terms. I just have not found a concept of God that makes sense to me. Certainly no concept of God in any of presented by any of the major religions. I once had a drug trip where that led me to believe in some kind of Gnostic, insane, or at least highly neurotic God who created out of a sense of desperate loneliness and horror at his existential predicament. But that doesn't work either. I just think that any concept of God we come up with is so inadequate to explaining the complexities and the horror and the joy of this universe that we just need to put them all behind us. And so I guess I sort of sympathize with the urge that you have to come up with a concept of God that makes sense. I just haven't seen one. You certainly in your writings acknowledge the dark side of existence enough that I know, I can't imagine that there's any concept of God that you've found that makes sense either, but you seem really determined to find one eventually.
Well, I don't know whether God would be the word for what it is. It's certainly not the word for what I've asserted the likely existence of in this conversation. I would say, just to back up and do a footnote, as for your reservations about my argument, I haven't even laid out the structure of the argument. And the one thing you said is like, wait, it's taken 3 billion years to get here. You're saying intelligent life was the purpose? Well, what you mean is it's taken 99.999% of the time in the past of organic life to get here. So how could this be the point? And likewise, if you just looked at a baby that was about to be born, I'd say, wait, it's taken 99.9% of the time of this thing has been spent in a totally insentient, this thing can't think its way out of a black. You're saying that this thing is designed to become really smart? That's crazy. My point is it's all relative. We don't know what the total time frame of anything is. All you know is it's 99.99%. In fact, if you want to talk about kind of anthropocentrism, that's what you're doing. You're saying, wait a second, to me, a year is a year is the fundamental unit of time, and it's taken a whole jillion, whatever. I mean, we don't know. We don't know.
That's a nice. That's a classic. That's a classic, Bob.
You mean in the sense that it's compelling, and you have no option but to surrender in the face of the overwhelming logic?
No, in the sense that it's It's extremely clever, but it's almost too clever. I'm just left. I look at the universe, and I see some of the same things that you see that make me think there has got to be a plan. This can't be just random. But then I come back to this concern I have about this being just a reflection of our narcissism. I also come back to my concern about this leading to some sort of religious system or set of supposedly universal values that creates trouble when it plays out in the world, because there are going to be people who don't agree with these particular values. So I'm just sort of poised between belief and non-belief. I'm in the position of a seeker who doesn't believe that there's anything out there actually to be found, but I keep seeking.
Well, Chip, I'm here to help. I think you may have found your guru.
I'll have to wait for your next book.
Could you do me a favor and sell all your possessions? And do you do PayPal? Could you sell all your possessions and wire the money to me?
Here's the funny thing, Bob. You're so concerned with finding meaning in life. You can have a very meaningful, happy life writing about and trying to convince other people of the meaninglessness of life. Sartre did this. So did Nietzsche. All the existentialists. And some of them are miserable.
Chip, the big bucks are in the God racket, man.
The evolution of Bob.
Yeah.
Well, we're all waiting. I can't wait to see what this book comes. When the hell is this coming out, anyway?
Well, various circumstances.
And by the way, the title is The Evolution of God,
yes.
right?
Various circumstances are creating a powerful incentive to hand in the complete draft pretty darn soon. I think I should be able to get them everything but the final chapter within a few weeks.
Jesus, I can't believe how, first of all, you're doing, seems like 2 or 3 blogging head segments a week, and some...
No, I'm actually, the 2 a week is an exception. It's Blogging Heads is eating up vast quantities of my time, but you are not seeing the iceberg, believe me.
Okay.
Ever done a big website redesign?
You're doing that too, huh?
Oh,
yeah, I'm
man.
actually trying to do one at school, but I've got fortunately,
yeah, but you have a staff of whatever. I mean, you have like
staff of one. I've got a whiz kid. I've got a whiz kid working on it.
You're not answerable to market forces.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't even talk about Blogging Heads. There were so many different. Actually, we got in. I think we got into the really big stuff that I wanted to talk to you about. So.
Yeah, and you're prone to big stuff. You and George usually get into some big stuff. I mean, I love the big stuff. I mean,
me
the politics and policy. Certainly politics. I'm not a political junkie at all.
What?
And policy, a lot of, I don't exactly follow the healthcare debate too closely. I mean, my favorite thing is to talk about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And,
me too. It's like you're getting paid to be in an endless sophomore in college, late night, pot smoking, wine drinking bullshit session
except
about the meaning of life.
Except for the part about the pot, the wine, and the getting paid. Yeah. Yeah. But it has the other virtues.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a bad way to make a living. And like I said, you can assume that life is meaningless, and it still can be a lot of fun. That's the
there's
that's
no
the
doubt.
paradox.
And I certainly leave people in peace who are having a good time, and there's nothing in my moral system that wants me to jerk them out of their state of happiness as long as they're not hurting anybody else.
Yes. Well, we can agree on that.
But I also think that the world is in a state of grave peril. And look, you started out asking about my Southern Baptist background. I don't doubt that has imbued me with some missionary zeal and some sense that you're supposed to try to save the world and everything else, and even some kind of hope that you can find some higher purpose. And I'm sure my views are colored by that. But that's the way inquiry happens. It's like look. if anyone ever proves the existence of God, it'll be probably someone who was hell-bent on proving it, who went into it with a bias. If anybody ever proves that there is no God, it'll be somebody who went into it with that bias. And that's the way inquiry works, But
well, what I admire, I think you give your optimism is earned. So some people have a cheap optimism. You can just sort of push all the problems and the darkness of life under the rug. But you, to your great credit, you pull it out, and you even try to work that into your basically positive outlook. I'm trying to do the same thing. I just, there are a few things that you believe in that I can't quite accept, so it's a little bit tougher on my part. On the other hand, I've been going around lately saying that, I think war is going to end someday pretty soon, so, some people think that I'm totally, wildly, naively optimistic for that. That's the challenge. Is finding it out. I do think we have a moral duty. It's not an absolute universal truth, but I think we have a moral duty, and maybe this is just biological. I've got kids. I have to be optimistic about the future. And so I'm trying
but they also make you anxious about it, don't they? I mean,
yes.
They make you think about the future. They make you care about what the world's going to be like in 30 or 40 years.
Right. I can't indulge in nihilism anymore. I used to when I was younger. Now it's just it's just not something that I can do.
Yeah, that may be true, and that may be partly an effect of parenthood.
Yeah.
It definitely.
I'm a soft evolutionary psychologist. It's just the evangelical aspects of it, especially 10 years ago when I was writing about it a lot.
Well, right, but you got to admit, that was when I was writing about it 13 years ago, my book, but we were a totally besieged minority at that point. It's really true. I mean, it was a different mentality. And now the big arguments in this realm are like, are you an individual selectionist or a group selectionist? It's like everybody's in the church, and it's just a question of whether they're Protestant or Catholic. Back in those days, I mean, there were people who really would try to stigmatize you for just arguing that genes, there is such thing as universal human nature grounded in the genes, and, some seemingly largely innocuous propositions.
Oh, you're such a Nazi.
Well, exactly. That's the kind of thing they're like, didn't Hitler talk about Darwin? Actually, I think not, but it's commonly believed, so I guess you win. It was that level of argumentation. Weren't there some really bad people who believed who used the word Darwin? That was about the extent of the argument. But
I remember you got pretty annoyed with me for titling I had the critique of...
Don't bring that up if you want to sustain our friendship. I remember that little... You wrote a piece in Scientific American that was very down on evolutionary psychology, fine, but the title of the piece was, what, The New Social Darwinism?
Yeah, no, The New Social Darwinists, I'm holding it up right here. That led to, I've had just 2 or 3 instances of you really rattling me by screaming at me in an absolute full-blown fury, and that was one of them. When you were chewing me out.
That was a phone conversation, right?
Yeah, it's journalism. You're trying to grab people's attention. A little hyperbole is called.
No, but that was a misuse of the term. I mean, the term. It's a little unclear. If you read the book on the person who coined the term social Darwinism was Richard Hofstadter. This Social Darwinism in American Thought is the book, and although when I went back at it, actually I admit, after talking to you, I went back and looked at the book for a definition that would totally vindicate my position. And he never gets around to really defining it quite clearly enough. But he's clearly talking about a whole moral program. The social Darwinists have a political program. And my point was, evolutionary psychologists don't. There are liberals, there are conservatives.
No, but I said that in the article. I said that right in the
you said social Darwinist is a bad title for this piece?
No, I said that unlike the first generation of social Darwinists, the evolutionary psychologists are very careful to distinguish is from ought, and just because this is how nature has designed us doesn't mean that it has to continue that way, and all those sorts of things. But in the core of the piece was evolutionary psychologists themselves worrying about some of the excesses of the field. So I was quoting Randolph Nessy, Napoleon Chagnon, even Daly and Wilson, all of them saying that they thought this was a very important enterprise, but given how some of this stuff had been abused in the past, they were a little bit worried about the tremendous enthusiasm for it in the present. So that's all I was trying to point out. And I think that's when science is talking about human nature, it can be extremely dangerous. It's not like particle physics. It raises all kinds of potential problems and how it can be applied in the realm of politics and other parts of culture. So,
and even things that are true can inspire bad behavior. People will look for excuses wherever they can find them, and if they can find them in a scientific truth, they will do that.
That's right.
And well,
I know you recognize that. Hey, Bob, two things. First of all, I've got to go take a leak, and second, I've got to go teach my class at school.
Well, Chip, as Uma Thurman says in Pulp Fiction, when John Travolta says, "I've got to go take a dump," that's a little more information than we needed, except for the part about school. Well,
this has been, I've really enjoyed it. I had probably a dozen questions that I didn't quite get to, but, whatever, some other time.
Well, I was very flattered and secretly enjoyed the part where you were, interviewing me. That this is the acme of my career.
That kind of fell apart, didn't it?
Well, I did try to derail it after a certain point to try to keep a few viewers on board, but I really was just basking in the glory for that 20 minutes or so.
That was interesting. I didn't know all that stuff. I didn't realize that, for example, that you came from such a hard Scrabble.
No, I didn't. I didn't. I mean, I was just. No, I didn't. My father did, and that influenced my environment in terms of values and everything. And we weren't rich. I mean, 5 kids and an army officer's salary, but I was not poor.
Yeah.
Not true.
Well, but you've come a long way. Fame and glory, and decent amount of money.
Well, and you've come a long way since being expelled from prep school, but we won't get into that today. We won't get into that.
Good one, Bob. Okay, on that note.
Yeah.
This
has been a lot of fun.